Hello, everyone. This is Anna McNaught.
Hi, this is Oscar Hernandez. I'm the lead organizer for Houston in Action.
And we want to share with you today how to host events in your communities and also provide you with some materials and resources to share. So for this webinar, we will be discussing Census Protection, confidentiality, how to host events in your community, and also how to ensure that the community is receiving the information that you provide for them.
Yeah, we'll be going over a bit of the history of the census as well as our toolkit, where you'll be able to get a lot of this information that we may not cover completely on this webinar. Okay, so for today, what we want to start off with is a grounding. Now, as we talk about census and the support we have for census that we want to give to our community, and when we talk about helping the undercounted community and ensuring that everyone is counted to get the proper resources that their community deserves, we first want to make sure that we're aligned with some of the dark history of the census and how the country has affected its most vulnerable populations. The way we're going to talk about it today, which would be really helpful, we have this visual storyteller who developed something through CityLab, and we have a breakdown of what the history of the census looked like. I won't go in detail through step-by-step of everything she wrote, but the PowerPoint here for this webinar will also be shared, and you can take tidbits from this PowerPoint based on your community and what you would like to share. Well, we can start off right now. To begin with, as you will see here, it does talk about how the census goes back all the way to ancient Egypt, to the Babylonians, and even the Incas, who tracked census questions to see who was living in the land. However, when it specifies about how the U.S. used census for political power, and this is actually something that led into some of the first compromises back when the southern states had a huge amount of slaves, and the population had big populations of the land was owned by white slave owners who had a lot of black bodies who were enslaved in those communities. Well, they weren't a community; they were really living in a horrible state of oppressed people. But because the southern states wanted to have more political power, they made an argument to count these slaves as part of their population so they can get more representation. And this is actually one of the first steps they gave us to the Fifth Compromise that stated that black slaves were 3/5 human, and they were counted as 3/5 human in order for these southern states to have some more political power based on their population. Through the process of how the census kept changing, it did ask in terms of the questions and how it tracked people. We have some very bizarre questions that were even asked the census, where they wanted to track things like if people were either deaf or blind, but they also had some odd responses as insane, idiotic, or dumb. So these are, as we've seen as time passes, different terminologies to identify the community has changed, but it became one of the biggest barriers or questions on how we track people based on race and ethnicity. So when we had people as time went by that were mixed race people, they had questions on which is not what is now considered a slur, mulatto, they black, were they quadroon, were they all these different terms to be able to identify people. And it even came into thinking about Asian populations, whether Chinese or Japanese people. It also understanding that most American indigenous people were not also fully counted through the census. And this is another way of not tracking what the population looked like, to not provide adequate resources to the communities that live here. Another big thing to analyze is also how the term Hispanic was in part of the census. Most Latinos who were either mixed with European and indigenous people, specifically Spanish and indigenous people, were counted as white. But after things kept changing in the country, they started identifying them as a Hispanic or Latino. So there's a lot of back and forth on how to identify people on race. But what is noticed is that it has been strategically put forth in a way that undercounts certain people and even overcounts a different population. Through early last century, the census was actually used to put a lot of in Japanese people into internment camps during the Second World War, as they were trying to figure out, as they use actually really racist practices to track people within the country. So these were naturalized born American citizens who had Japanese descendants. And because of this, this was also used to basically use as an excuse to arrest people and put them into these internment camps. Now, as things progressed, though, the population did shift and change because America does have the majority population of immigrant folks, but it also has a wide and large population of indigenous people who have always been here. And as these populations continued to grow, the demographics changed. So there was another back and forth on what the political power should look like. That even this led into considering what civil rights and Voting Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act that happened during the civil rights era, where people were fighting that the population deserved to be not only counted to the census, but recognition to political power based on where they live. So a lot of difficult things have happened. There has been a lot of progress through the engagement of these communities. But despite the Voting Rights Act and despite a lot of the progress that's moved forward, there's still massive amount of people who have been undercounted. Typically, women get undercounted through the census, children from ages 0 to 5. But when it comes to ethnicity, in certain populations, in the 1970s, about 7.7 of the Black population went undercounted nationally, which is a huge amount of people that do not get representation where they live because they go undercounted. And in many spaces, especially in white rural districts, the political power, white folks actually end up getting overcounted in certain places. So as we could talk a little bit more about what overcounting means, but what we want to focus on is not only the fact that people of color get marginalized and are undercounted to the system, but that it has been strategically placed so people don't get counted. So the resources and funding that would get to them ends up not being available. Through this process, what we mean by overcounting is that in many cases, there have been people in a family that maybe by mistake end up filling the census twice. As y'all might already know, and we'll talk about it more through the rest of this presentation, is that if one person in the household fills out the census, they can and will fill it out for everyone in that household. But in many cases, the people who get overcounted have been people who are not poor, or people who are well off, high middle class, and people who oftentimes have divorced parents, who the parents would track them in one household and they would be tracked again in another household. But the overall population who have gone overcounted in many cases have been white Americans in the US. Through this system that we talk about, especially as I hope everyone here takes their time to read through each step of this beautiful art and well-depicted history of the census. But our intention is more than anything to recognize as we are taking an approach to talk to communities of color, to talk to communities who've been disenfranchised through the system, people who usually feel both uneasy or overall distrust of the government, that we want to recognize that some of the distrust comes from an honest place, and we want to meet them where they are. And we want folks to understand that, yes, we understand the distrust, but we also want to make sure that folks are well informed and that they understand the benefits of why they need to fill out the census. And in many cases, it's also analyzing why there are what are the problems that could happen if they do not fill it out. So we want to focus on helping the community understand that that undercounted people or undercounted population in the U.S. through the census means that they will be underfunded, that organizations that serve them will be understaffed, and that most importantly for them, as we think about the representation and the people who fight for our community, that they will be underrepresented. Through the last couple of years, there's especially in the last from 2018 to now, there was a huge debate on asking for the citizenship question. For us, we also feel that this is a way to intimidate and scare people from answering the census, so the communities don't get the resources they need. So, in addressing to what the census question looks like, at the moment, the Supreme Court had decided not to include the census question. The citizenship question within the census survey. But we also feel that the damage has been done for a lot of the community who might be fearful, who don't understand if the census is for only citizens, does it track everybody, should undocumented people answer it, and why should undocumented people answer the census if they might be at risk of being deported or arrested. So these are a lot of tricky questions that we're going to have to figure out the best way to answer for the community. But remembering that our role and our intention, more than anything, is to empower folks to participate in the census, to inform them, to make sure that they understand the reasoning for our process and why folks need to answer the census, and that they make the decision on answering it on themselves. So we want an informed community, an empowered community that understands why their civil participation is important, and that they can decide for themselves on whether or not they will answer the census. But we do want to encourage them to do so. We do want to empower them to do so, and that the decision comes from them. So when we think of the census of not only as the form and the history of it, but what is it that people, when do people need to fill it out? What are the dates? So when we want to inform people, it's not only about the history and what the census is, but to keep in mind and keep track of the dates they need to fill it out. So for us, for the timeline that we have, and I first want to give a special shout out to our HIA partners and members who have supported us to put a lot of these resources together. This is a census calendar developed by Naleo, so we can think about the dates and timeline that we should keep in mind. And that in January, counting for remote areas begin. So this is spaces like Alaska and places that it's very difficult for people to, smaller populations, difficult for people to have access to internet. But come like March and April, households can self-respond. We've been informed that that the application might be out as soon as as soon as March 13th. This is for people who can respond, who want to respond online. And that way by March 13th, they can take it early. The census day, again, is April 1st, 2020. This is a national census day where everyone in the community and everyone will be hearing about the census frequently. To get that push on this day, everyone should be counted. From May to June, following that census day, there is a possibility. It might be low because we're not sure what the funding for the Census Bureau will look like around this time. But there's a there's a possibility that we will have numerators, which numerators are people that go door to door knocking, talking to the community and asking them the questions about the census, for people who have not filled it out. So if people want to avoid a numerator coming to their door, they can either respond to the census online or do it via phone call. So come December 2020 is when we'll have like the final count of the census and what the information looks like for them.
Thank you, Oscar. So we want to talk about census protection and confidentiality. As Oscar mentioned, we come from a history of exclusion when it comes to counting people that are living in the country. So in order for us to talk about counting everyone and getting the community to also participate, we also need to talk about why census protection and confidentiality matters. When Oscar discussed the internment camps of Japanese Americans, it's important to highlight that as a result of that census information that was supposed to be confidential and that was used against people, the U.S. decided to include a Title 13 to the U.S. Code that protects any information that you are sharing with the Census Bureau. So whenever you are ready to fill out your questionnaire, know that confidentiality statutes have already been in place, and census enumerators or anyone from the census is liable to up to $250,000 of a fine and up to 5 years in prison if they share this information. Now, knowing that, we know that it's going to take a lot of messaging and a lot of repetition and a lot of information to be shared with the community so that they can participate. So in this section, we'll talk about census outreach do's and don'ts, confidentiality and protection, and empowering your community to participate, knowing that this information is available, but still understanding that there will be challenges, and what are some of the resources that are available. So this slide was supported in coordination through the Texas Civil Rights Project, which is a member organization of Houston in Action. And we wanted to give you organizations that are doing outreach in the community a sense of what are some of the do's and don'ts when you are talking to people about the form and why the census matters. So some of them are very common sense, but we want to also reiterate that it's important for you to say that you're not the Census Bureau. When you talk about the census, people tend to think that you work for the Census Bureau. So it's important that you say that you are not part of the Census Bureau and also name the organization that you're with. Definitely share why the census is so important. And when we talk about resources available, you want to make this message as personal as possible so that people can get a sense of urgency also of why they should participate. You can also share that their answers to the census are confidential, and you can also share a timeline for when filling out the census will be available for everyone. In terms of the don'ts, again, don't state or imply that you work for the census. In this area, we are asking, or for this form rather, we're asking that you don't help people fill out the census. Only census enumerators can do that. And we'll go into more details about what that means when Oscar talks about the one form of engagement with the community, which is the census quiz. Don't mislead people about anything census related. If you don't know an answer to one of the questions, please say that you don't know. And then, of course, we ask that you, whenever you're doing outreach, that you are wearing actually, a T-shirt of your organization, but nothing that is partisan or candidate related, because this can be confusing to people that may already have questions about why the census and who engages with you as you are filling out the form. So in terms of census confidentiality, like we shared with you under Title 13 of US Code, your data can only be used for statistical purposes. Your data will be shared not in an individualized manner, but really to show where businesses should be created, where libraries should be funded, where we need more resources for children. And so the information cannot be disclosed for 72 years. And again, the Census Bureau staff who have access to personal information and are sworn for life to protect confidentiality. And as I mentioned to you, there's a fine, a hefty fine for people that share this information. And we definitely want to ensure that these protections are in compliance with the administration, or rather that the administration complies with them. So we know that when you are working with communities that may be vulnerable, there are predatory practices that can come to them and promise them something that doesn't exist. We see that a lot with immigration applications and immigration resources in general. However, we want to say to everyone that may have questions that the form does not cost anything, that enumerators are people hired by the US Census to follow up with you in case you did not fill out the form. Census Bureau, online or in person, enumerators should not ask anyone for any confidential information, such as social security number, immigration status, or any kind of access to financial information. This is particularly important for our seniors that usually get scammed when they do not know if financial information should be shared with anyone over the phone or in person. And of course, the enumerators or the Census Bureau will never ask for money or donations. This slide talks about how enumerators should identify themselves when they come to the door. So census enumerators should have an ID, and they should identify themselves as workers with the Census Bureau. And so if you have any questions or concerns about anyone pretending to be a census enumerator that doesn't show you their ID, you can call the National Association of Latino Elected Officials hotline. Our NALEO Educational Fund partners have a hotline that will directly receive calls from any concerns. And then you can also call the Census Bureau. And when you're doing these presentations, you can also use this slide, and you can also add, since people will trust you and people do trust you, they will probably also reach out to you with questions or concerns. So feel free to add your name and your contact as well as the organization's name so they know how to have access to that connection. This slide shows the details of how NALEO Educational Fund is utilizing the census hotline to inform the community. You'll be able to call this line, and it's from 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So it will cover all of the time zones of the United States. You can ask questions about outreach events in your community, any questions that you may have about the census form and the timeline, and then of course basic information on the questionnaire and who should be included.
So what we want to focus on, as we talked about, is not only informing our community, but empowering our community. So before you go out to the community and talk to them, really take a moment to think about who is the community you serve. So I know that this might be a common practice to some organizations, but it might not be common to all. We often make assumptions on who our organization is, not only based on the faces that come in, but there's something more than a descriptor of what ethnicity they are or where they live. Remember, our community are people. So what do our people care about? And even though it's not written in here, thinking about the motivators, like what motivates people to move to action, to move to participate. Especially in my community, I know we're very strong on going to parties. Whenever a party happens, I've had family members travel across the country to participate. Um, and it's not only because of the music or the food, it's because they want to be there, because they want to connect with the family, because they want them to know that they have support. This is also showed in, especially around funerals. So when someone passes away, our family have traveled long and far to spend time with somebody just to show you that they support and that they're there. So if you think about what our community is and think about what they care about, it's not only if you just throw a census party, but nobody knows what the census is, then people are gonna come just for the food. They won't understand what they're doing. They won't make any commitment, and they won't really participate. So that's not the best way to. It might be a good way to inform people. It might be a good way to bring people, but it wouldn't be empowering them to actually take action and participate. Um, so that's why when we consider how we empower the community, it's also what do they imagine for their families and their neighborhood. So sometimes somebody might not necessarily pay attention to the census until you tell them this is like $1,500 that could be lost per person per year, which is about $15,000 in this 10-year process. Some people might want to move based on that. Others may not. Others may not move until you tell them this will affect your children's school lunches. This might you might not be able to. You might have to pay for school lunches because, according to the census, that need isn't here. It might be a Head Start program. It might be that they care of a park down the street. But it's not just about the benefits that people get from filling out the service. The census. It's also about what motivates them to participate overall. If you think about these questions and thinking about the process that you will take to talk with people, what actually moves people to participate? And starting from there, you can think about the process and how you want to engage with them properly. So before we go into what it looks like in building a census event, we want to cover the resources that are available to the community. For a lot of the organizations here, you'll be able to get all the resources are open, which are in Houston in Action website, which is houstoninaction.org. For the organizations who are members currently, you have access to our Basecamp, which is an amazing tool where we'll be able to share all the resources that we're developing. And if you want to get more information about the census, don't rely just only on Houston in Action. Remember that we have a lot of partners both locally and nationally who are supporting with a lot of information. Here at Houston in Action, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, as people say. We want to make sure that we're using our partner and our members' resources. So Census Counts is an amazing website that has continuously up-to-date, not only webinars and trainings, but resources, flyers, and everything you can look at you might need to the census. The Naleo Education Fund, as I gave them a shout out earlier, they have been amazing by sharing a lot of their PowerPoint and presentation, as well as their hotline. So this is primarily for, this is especially if you have a Latino population, they will be able to actually get more resources through Naleo. For especially folks who are working with the Asian community, the AAJC has an amazing platform where they would share information about how to get more Asian Americans participating in the census and going out to participating overall in civic engagement. And then Color of Change, which focuses on helping both the Black community within the U.S., which even though a lot of the Black community has been very active civically, this is also another way to be able to engage with them in a way that resonates based on what the community is feeling and how they respond.
Yeah, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of the newsletters that you're able to access. There are many other resources that are available, like the Census Bureau's newsletter, and of course, other local resources from the different states that are engaging in Complete Count Committee and Census outreach efforts. So our recommendation is that you sign up to the newsletters that make sense to you. And those newsletters will also lead into invitations to participate in webinars and updates on the toolkits and the events that are happening in the community. So we really invite you to consider signing up to some of these newsletters so that you can remain updated in terms of the information that is out there.
Yes, and in terms of those tools that we have, if you do have any other places, or I'm sorry, if you get your census information from any other locations, feel free to reach out to us and make sure that we highlight it. If you have a lot of tools and flyers and presentations available that you would like to share, please make sure to add them to let us know so we can share that with the community as well. So the more people have access to information that is led by the community, the better we can outreach to the community. So what we want to talk about right now is jumping into our toolkit, where you will see where all of your information is going to end up if it's sent to us in Houston in Action. So this is our HoustonInAction.org webpage. Our toolkit is at HoustonInAction.org/census. And once you get to this webpage, and just so a quick update, it might be a little modified by the time people get to this webpage because we want to make it as user-friendly as possible. So it would say Census Toolkit, important dates, frequently asked questions. So you can view not only based on these categories, but also what is on the calendar time that we have created with our partners. So we have a really amazing calendar there that our partners and HI members can fill out. And when they fill it out, a lot of their events will pop up on our webpage. So you can see what other resources are happening near your community. And then clicking on a Census Toolkit will take us into this layout that it is pretty extensive and pretty long at the moment, where you'll be able to click on based on a category. So if you want to reach to the LGBTQ community, you can actually focus on what resources are available to the LGBTQ community. If you're looking for how to support folks within the Latino community, you might also, all you have to do is click and base it on the category, and then that'll take you to the information that we have available. We're also working diligently to see about translating a lot of this information so that way we can make sure it's fully accessible, and that as we think about how to work with our community, that there is a language justice component to it. So for us and Houston in Action, there are many tools and many ways that we can connect through the information that we give to the community, but there's also many ways in which you can connect with the community through not just our services, but through the information we're able to give. So remember to contact Anna at HoustonInAction.org, Oscar at HoustonInAction.org if you want have any questions about our census organizers or the resources or events that are happening. Remember to go through our HoustonInAction.org website so you can check out events, so you can upload the events that you might have going on. So this is another great opportunity to give outreach to, to provide outreach to the community through our website, as well as getting all the information you may need.
Thank you, Oscar, and thank you everyone for your participation. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in the different meetings and trainings that we host, and we hope that this webinar was helpful for your outreach. Thank you.